Almost every Muslim community on earth marks the 40th day after a death. The gathering, the recitation, the food, the house full of people again 40 days after it emptied. If you have lost someone, you have probably sat through one. It is one of the most widespread practices in the Muslim world, observed across continents and languages by people who have no other custom in common. There is no 40th day in the Quran. There is no 40th day in Sahih al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim or any authentic narration. There is no marker at 40 days, no marker at 7, no marker at 1 year. The entire sequence of what happens to a person after death is described in the sources in remarkable detail, in order, step by step, and at no point does anyone count the days. That is not a small gap. It is the difference between what a person is actually told and what a person is generally told. And the gap has been filled by something that came from somewhere else. And the gap exists in a strange place, because this is not a subject the sources are quiet about. What happens to a person after they die is described in Islam with more sequential detail than almost any other unseen matter. There is an order to it, stage by stage, and we have it from sound narration. So this is not a case of a silence being filled. It is a case of a detailed account being overwritten. But I want to be careful about how we do this, because this is not an abstract subject. Some of you are watching this within weeks of losing someone. So we are going to spend most of this video on what is authentically established, walked through in order from the last moments of a life onward, because that material is extensive and it is far better than what replaced it. And then near the end we will deal with where 40 came from, briefly and without contempt, because the people who practice it are not doing anything malicious. They are grieving in the way they were taught. Start with the word for where the soul actually goes. Chapter 23, Al-Mu'minun, verse 100. The verse describes a person, at the point of death, asking to be sent back, to do righteousness in what he left behind. And the answer given is that it is a word he is speaking, and no more than that. And then the verse ends with this, and behind them is a barzakh until the day they are resurrected. Barzakh. That is the only place in the Quran where the word is used in this sense, and it is the technical term for the entire period this video is about. The word itself is not originally theological. In Arabic, it means a barrier, a partition, something standing between two things and keeping them separate. The Quran uses the same word elsewhere in an entirely physical sense, describing a barrier between two bodies of water that do not mix. So the term chosen for the state after death is a word for a wall. And that choice rules some things out immediately. A barrier is not a waiting room with furniture, and it is not a corridor you walk down. It is the thing standing between two states, and the only two things a barrier tells you about are the sides it separates. Now notice what a wall implies, because the choice is doing real work. A barrier separates two things that would otherwise meet. It has a side you are on and a side you are not on. And crucially, it is not a destination. Nobody builds a wall to live in. It is the thing between where you were and where you are going. That is what the Quran calls the period between death and resurrection. Not a place, a partition, with a stated endpoint, which the verse gives explicitly, until the day they are resurrected. So the barzakh has a defined beginning and a defined end, and the Quran tells you both. What it does not tell you, anywhere, is how long it lasts or what internal divisions it has. There is no calendar in it. And there is a passage that suggests the experience of duration inside it is not what we would assume. Chapter 23 continues, a few verses later, to describe being asked on that day how long they remained on the earth. And the answer given is a day, or part of a day. Then they are told to ask those who keep count. Whatever else that passage establishes, it establishes that counting is not what is happening in there. The people being asked have lost track entirely, and the text does not correct them with a number. It simply notes that someone else keeps count. Nobody inside the barzakh is watching a calendar. That is stated in the Quran in the same chapter as the word itself. Hold that, because it is the whole point of this video. Now the sequence, and this is where the sources become remarkably detailed. There is one narration that gives the entire process in order, from the final moments of life onward, and it is one of the longest single narrations on any subject in the collections. It is reported from Al-Bara ibn Azib, may Allah be pleased with him, recorded by Imam Ahmad in his Musnad and by Abu Dawud in his Sunan, and also preserved by Al-Hakim and Al-Baihaqi. Al-Baihaqi graded it authentic. Al-Albani graded it authentic in Sahih al-Jami. It is a sound narration, and it is the primary text on this subject. Here is how it begins, and the setting matters. Al-Bara says they went out with the Prophet, peace be upon him, to the funeral of a man from the Ansar. They came to the grave, and it had not yet been prepared. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, sat down, and the companions sat around him. And Al-Bara describes their stillness with a phrase that has become famous. He says it was as though there were birds on their heads, meaning nobody moved, because any movement would have startled them away. In his hand he had a stick, and he was marking the ground with it. Then he raised his head and said, "Seek refuge with God from the punishment of the grave." He said it 2 or 3 times. The repetition is not incidental. When a teaching is repeated immediately, in the same breath, it is being emphasized, and what is being emphasized here is an instruction rather than a description. Ask for protection. That is the first thing said on the subject, and it is an action rather than an image. And then he began to describe what happens. Notice where this teaching was delivered, not in a lecture, not in a mosque, standing beside an open grave at a funeral, to people who had just carried a body there. That is the context in which the most detailed account of what follows death was given. He began with the believer. When the believing servant is departing this world and turning toward the next, angels descend to him from the heavens with white faces, and the narration compares their faces to the sun. They bring with them a shroud from paradise and fragrance from paradise, and they sit from him at a distance as far as the eye can see. Stop on that image before we continue. The first thing described is not a judgment and not an interrogation. It is arrival. A large number of beings coming down and taking their places, filling the entire visible distance before anything else happens at all. And they arrive carrying 2 things, a shroud and a fragrance, and both of them are burial provisions. They have come with what is needed, ready in advance, which means the preparation happened somewhere else before the moment arrived. Nothing in this scene is being assembled on the spot. There is also something in the number and the distance worth noticing. They sit as far as the eye can see. Whatever the scale of that is, the point being made is that the person is not alone, and is not alone by a very large margin. Dying is described in these sources as one of the most crowded moments of a person's existence, which is close to the opposite of how it is usually imagined. Then the angel of death comes and sits at his head, and he says, "O good soul, come out to forgiveness from God and his pleasure." Look at the form of that. It is an address, and it is an invitation. The soul is called by a description of itself and told where it is going, and the 2 things named as the destination are forgiveness and pleasure. The narration then describes the soul coming out the way a drop of water flows from the mouth of a waterskin, easily, without resistance, without being torn out. And the angel of death takes it, and the narration specifies that it is not left in his hand for the blink of an eye before the other angels take it and place it in that shroud and that fragrance. And that speed is part of the description. The soul is not held, not examined, not detained at the point of exit. It is passed on immediately and wrapped in what was brought for it. Then the ascent begins, and this is the part almost nobody has heard. The narration says that from the soul comes a scent like the finest musk found on the face of the earth, and they carry it upward, and they do not pass a gathering of angels without those angels asking, "Who is this good soul?" And they answer with the person's name, and with the name of his father, using the most beautiful names by which he was known in the world. So the ascent is not silent, it is a procession, and at every level the question is asked and the name is given. And look at which name. The narration specifies the most beautiful names by which he was known in the world, not a designation issued for the occasion. What people actually called him at his best. That detail is doing something quiet and enormous. The person going up is recognizably the same person who was down here. Continuity of identity established by the use of an ordinary name at every checkpoint of the ascent. Then they arrive at the lowest heaven and ask for it to be opened for him, and it is opened, and the angels of each heaven accompany him to the next until they reach the 7th. And there the command is given, "Record the book of my servant in Illiyun," which the Quran mentions in chapter 83 as the register of the righteous. and then the instruction to return him to the earth, and the reason given is a statement about origin. From it I created them, and into it I return them, and from it I will bring them out another time. That is a near quotation of chapter 20, verse 55, and it is the same clay from the beginning of everything. So the soul goes all the way up, is registered, and is returned. That round trip is worth registering as a shape. The journey does not end at the top. It goes to the highest point. Something is recorded, and then it comes back down to the ground it came from, and the reason given is the ground itself. From it, I created them, and into it, I return them. The clay is mentioned at the beginning of everything, and it is mentioned again here. The material a person was made from is the material they are returned to, and the same verse says they will be brought out of it again. 3 movements, all attached to the same substance. Now the questioning, and this is the beat everybody has heard about, and almost nobody has heard accurately. The narration says the soul is returned to the body, and that the person hears the footsteps of those who attended his funeral as they walk away. Sit with that detail for a moment, because it is one of the most human lines in the entire Hadith corpus. The last sound described is the people who came, leaving. Everyone who has been to a burial knows that sound, the turning away, the walking back, the low voices. It is the moment the event becomes over for everyone, except one person. That sound is in the narration, and it was delivered to people standing beside an open grave who were about to make it. Then 2 angels come, and they seat him, and they ask 3 questions. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? And what do you say about this man who was sent among you? 3 questions. That is the whole examination, and they are asked in a specific order that is worth noticing, moving from the identity of the Lord to the religion, to the man who was sent, general to specific, each one narrowing. And notice what is not on that list. There is no accounting of deeds here, no ledger, no itemization. That comes later, on the day of judgment, and it is a separate event entirely. What is asked in the grave is not what did you do, it is what did you hold to be true. The narration describes the believer answering, and then a voice calling out from the heavens confirming the answers, and instructing that he be given furnishing from paradise and clothing from paradise, and that a door be opened for him toward it. And then the fragrance and the breeze of paradise reach him, and his grave is widened as far as the eye can see. Then a figure comes to him with a good appearance and a good scent, bringing news that gladdens him, and he asks who this is, and the answer given is, I am your good deeds. That is one of the most striking images in Islamic teaching. The good a person did arrives as a companion and identifies itself. Think about what that implies about the nature of an action. In this account, a deed is not merely recorded and filed. It becomes something with a presence, that shows up, that has a face and a scent, and that stays. Every quiet thing a person did, done years ago and forgotten by everyone, including them, is described as taking a form and arriving, which reframes what a good deed actually is, not a mark on a ledger somewhere, something being made. And the believer's response is not relief, and it is not rest. The narration says he asks for the hour to come so that he may return to his family and his wealth. Read that carefully. He is being shown his place, and his response is to want the next thing to happen. Even settled, even shown what is waiting, he is asking for the appointment to arrive, which is the opposite of the picture most people carry, where the grave is an ending and everything after it is stillness. In this account, the person is oriented forward the entire time, and the barzakh behaves exactly as its name suggests, a barrier with something on the other side of it that the person on this side is waiting to get past. Now, the narration describes the other case as well, in parallel, and I am going to handle it with restraint on purpose. The Prophet, peace be upon him, described the reverse for the one who rejected. Different angels, a difficult departure, a refusal at the heavens, a return, and the 3 questions answered with the words, I do not know. And then the reverse of everything the believer received. The details of that half are in the sources, and anyone can read them. I am not going to narrate them here, and the reason is that this video will reach people who buried someone recently and who lie awake wondering. Dwelling on it serves no one, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave the teaching in the form of a warning to the living rather than a description to dwell on. He opened by telling his companions to seek refuge from it, which is an instruction about what to do, not an invitation to imagine. So take the instruction and leave the imagery. He gave his companions a supplication rather than a picture, and a supplication is something you can act on tonight. There is one more thing about the parallel structure of the two accounts that is worth stating, because it is the mercy inside the design. The two paths are described as fully symmetrical, matched at every stage, which means that everything difficult in the second account has a corresponding ease in the first, and the first is the one being taught to people who are trying. Quick word before we continue. If this is landing for you, take a second to subscribe and hit that like button. It genuinely moves this channel forward more than you would think. And I want to hear from you in the comments on this one, but I want to ask you something different from usual. If you have lost someone, say their name in the comments and make a dua for them. That costs nothing, and it is one of the few things in this entire subject that the sources say actually reaches them. I read every comment on these videos. Then stay with me, because we are about to deal with the 40th day, where it came from, and then with the 3 things that genuinely benefit someone after they are gone. Back to the sequence. So that is the sequence, and it is worth stopping to notice what it contains. The departure, the reception by the angels, the taking of the soul, the wrapping, the ascent through the heavens, with the name given at each level, the registration, the return, the footsteps, the 3 questions, the answer from the heavens, the widening, the companion who arrives. That is a detailed and ordered account, entirely from sound narration, and it covers everything from the last breath onward. And there is no number anywhere in it. Not a single interval is specified. No hours, no days, no weeks. Every stage happens, in order, and the text never once tells you how long any of it takes, or attaches a date to any part of it. That absence is remarkable, given how specific the rest of it is. This is an account that tells you the color of the angels' faces, the texture of how the soul comes out, the scent, the exact wording of what is said at each stage, and the sound of footsteps walking away. It is not a vague account, it is granular. And a source that granular, that never once mentions an interval, is telling you something by the omission, which brings us to the 40th day. The most common belief attached to it is that the soul remains near the house, or returns to it, for 40 days, and departs on the 40th. That belief has no basis in the Quran, and no basis in any authentic narration. Scholars asked about it directly have described it as having no foundation, and have noted that when a person dies, they move to another realm, and the family does not perceive them. There is a second version, which is more graphic, and which I will state only in summary because the details are unpleasant and unnecessary. It claims a sequence of changes to the body at 3 days, at 10, and at 40. Scholars addressing that claim have identified it as false and fabricated, with no evidence behind it at all. Some have suggested it is the origin of the 40th day observance itself. And on the gatherings, Ibn Uthaymin was asked directly about the practice of marking the 40th day with a gathering and a recitation, and he answered that it is among the innovations practiced by some people. That is the ruling, stated plainly, and other scholars have concurred. Now, here is where I want to be careful, and I mean this. If your family does this, they are not doing it out of defiance. Nobody arrives at a 40th day gathering intending to add something to the religion. They are doing it because their mother did it, and her mother did it, and because when someone dies, you want to do something, and the alternative feels like doing nothing. That impulse is not the problem. The impulse is right, and the tradition has a great deal to say in favor of it. It has simply been pointed at a date that no text ever established. And I would rather you heard that from someone who is going to spend the next few minutes telling you what to do instead, than from someone whose entire contribution is the word innovation. There is also a real question about how these practices spread, and the honest answer is that nobody chose them. Customs around death are among the oldest things any community has. They predate most of what a society believes. They travel between neighboring communities easily because funerals are public, and they get absorbed without anyone ever making a decision. A practice can be in a family for 8 generations and still have entered from somewhere else, and nobody along that chain did anything wrong. One observation from the scholars is worth passing on, because it is about the family rather than the ruling. Several have noted that reassembling a grieving household 40 days later and reopening what had begun to settle can be a burden rather than a mercy. There is a social expectation attached, and often a financial one, on a family that may be least able to carry either. Islam limits formal condolence rather than extending it, and the reason given is to let a household return to its life. So the objection is not that people care too much, it is that a fixed date can end up serving the custom rather than the person, and that the household paying for it is usually the household least able to. None of which means you should walk out of your grandmother's gathering. If you find yourself at one, you are among people who loved someone and came to say so, and there is dua being made in that room. What the ruling addresses is treating the date as required. Being present with family in grief is not what anyone is objecting to, and this matters practically, because there is something better available, and it is available every day rather than once. Here is what the sound narrations actually say benefits a person after they die. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that when a human being dies, his deeds come to an end except for three: a continuing charity, knowledge that people benefit from, and a righteous child who prays for him. Three things, and here is the pattern in the list. Every single one of them is ongoing rather than dated. Not one is an event. Take them in order. A continuing charity is called sadaqah jariyah, and the word jariyah means flowing. It is the same root used for running water. Not a payment then, but something that keeps moving after the person who started it has stopped. A well that people are still drinking from. A tree still producing. A building still in use. Anything that keeps giving without further input from the one who set it going. The defining feature is that it does not require the person to still be here. And notice how ordinary the examples in the tradition are. Water, planting. These are not grand endowments available only to the wealthy. The category is defined by whether a thing continues, not by what it cost. If someone you loved has died and you want to do something for them, this is the highest value action available, and it can be small. A share in something that keeps running, in their name, is worth more in this framework than any single event on any single date, because it does not stop. Knowledge that people benefit from is the second, and it operates the same way. Something taught, written, or passed on that continues moving between people afterward. Every person who learns it and acts on it is drawing from a source the originator can no longer tend. And this one compounds in a way the first does not. A person taught, teaches. What was passed to 5 reaches 50, and the original transmitter is not involved in any of it. This is also why the whole apparatus of chains and transmission that this channel keeps returning to exists. People understood that passing something on accurately was itself an act that outlives the one passing it. And the third is a righteous child who makes dua for them, which is the one available to everyone watching this, right now, at no cost and with no preparation. That is worth pausing on, because it means the most powerful thing you can do for a parent who has died is something you can do lying in bed at 2 in the morning without telling anyone. It requires no gathering, no date, no arrangement, and no money. And notice the word in the narration is righteous child, which is doing something specific. The benefit is tied to the child's own condition, not only to the act, which means the way you live is itself part of what reaches them. A parent who raised someone who turned out well is receiving something continuously, from a person they can no longer see, without either of them arranging it. That is the closest thing in this subject to an ongoing relationship, and the tradition puts it in the same list as a well and a book. And there are other sound narrations in the same direction, several of them arising from exactly the situation you may be in. A man came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and said his mother had died suddenly, and that he thought if she had been able to speak, she would have given in charity. He asked whether it would benefit her if he gave on her behalf. The answer was yes. Notice the shape of that exchange. A person in fresh grief, asking whether there is anything left that they can do. The answer given was not a ritual and not a date. It was yes, and go ahead. The funeral prayer itself is, in its substance, supplication for the deceased. That is what the prayer largely consists of: fulfilling their unpaid obligations, settling their debts, completing what they left unfinished. All of this is established. There is also the practice of visiting graves, which the Prophet, peace be upon him, permitted and encouraged, and he taught his companions what to say when they did. The instruction is to greet the people of the place and to ask well-being for them and for oneself. Notice that even there, no interval is specified. Go and say this, not go on this day. So the tradition is not silent about what the living can do. It is unusually specific about it, and much of it arose from ordinary people asking ordinary questions in grief. What it does not do, anywhere, is attach any of it to a calendar. And that is the actual finding of this video, so let me put it plainly. The sequence after death is described in order and in detail, and it contains no dates. The things the living can do are described in detail, and they contain no dates. The 40th day is the one element in this entire subject with a number on it, and it is the one element with no textual basis. Everything real here is continuous. Only the invented part is scheduled. And once you see that, the whole subject reorganizes itself. The question is not, what am I supposed to do on the 40th day? The question is, what am I doing on all of them? Which is, when you think about it, a kindness rather than a restriction. A fixed date is a day on which you have done your duty, and by implication, the other 364 on which you have not. Removing the date does not take something away from you. It removes the ceiling. There is no day on which your dua for them stops counting. There is no expiry on any of it, and there is no point at which you have missed the window. That last part matters for anyone who did not know this until now. If your family observed the 40th day and you are only hearing this today, nothing has been lost. Everything described in this section is available from this moment, and none of it was foreclosed by anything anyone did before. Before the last thing, one practical note, because people ask it constantly and the silence about it causes real anxiety. Nothing in the authentic material describes the deceased as being aware of the details of a household's mourning or as being troubled by whether a gathering was held. That entire register of worry, that they are watching and waiting to see what is done for them, is not from the sources. It comes from the same place the 40th day comes from. What is established is that certain things reach them, not that they are monitoring you. That distinction may be the most relieving thing in this video, because the version people carry is exhausting, and it is not the version they were given. And there is one more thing worth saying, for anyone watching this who is carrying something heavier than a question about custom. A great deal of grief is not about ritual at all. It is about a person you loved who died before something was fixed, a conversation that did not happen, years that went wrong, something they did, or something you did, that never got resolved and now cannot be. The Quran does not leave that unaddressed. Chapter 39, verse 53. Say, O my servants who have transgressed against themselves, do not despair of the mercy of God. Indeed, God forgives all sins. Indeed, He is the forgiving, the merciful. Notice how wide that verse is. It does not name a category of sin, and it does not name a category of person. It says all sins, and it addresses servants who have wronged themselves, which is everyone who has ever lived. Nobody is in a position to say where a particular person stands. That is not knowledge any of us has been given, and the tradition is firm that claiming it about a named individual is not ours to do. What we have been given is the description of the one who decides, and the description is the one in that verse. The angels described in the narration we walked through arrive carrying a fragrance and a shroud, prepared in advance, before the person has said a word. That is the disposition of the thing you are worried about, prepared in advance, arriving with what is needed, before anything was asked. So, make the dua, give something in their name, finish something they started, teach the thing they taught you to somebody else, do it tomorrow and the day after, and not because it is the 40th of anything, and then let the days go uncounted. That is not neglect. It is what the sources actually describe, and it is the more generous arrangement by a long way, because a thing with no date attached to it is a thing with no last day. Nobody in the sources is counting, neither should you. If you want to go further into what happens after the Barzakh ends, the 7 heavens and what was seen at every gate is on this channel, and it is the natural next one to watch.